Hello friends, Iverson here, and it's time for another video. Today's question, how does a mailbox provider support and display BIMI logos? The short answer is this. Number one, validate the email. Number two, find the BIMI record. Number three, validate the logo. Number four, then decide whether you trust the sender enough to display the logo. There you go, 4 easy steps. Boom, you're done. End of video. Just kidding. While this is basically what BIMI support boils down to, why don't we take a few minutes to unpack each of these steps? First, let's validate the email message. BIMI starts with authentication. If a message isn't properly authenticated, there shouldn't be a logo. That means the message needs to pass DMARC, and the sending domain needs to have a DMARC policy at enforcement. P equals quarantine or P equals reject. No DMARC, no BIMI. So let's assume the message passes DMARC through aligned SPF or DKIM authentication, and the domain has a DMARC enforcement level policy in place. Great. Step one is complete. Now on to step two. Find the BIMI record. BIMI records live in DNS. The mailbox provider looks for a BIMI record associated with the visible from domain. If a record isn't found at the exact match level, meaning it could be a top-level domain or a subdomain, implementations today fall back to look for a BIMI record at that organizational or top level for a domain. That's why a BIMI record published at the org level of a domain will result in a logo showing for mail sent from subdomains as well. So once you've found that BIMI record, what are you looking at? Usually you'll find a URL pointing to an SVG logo file. You may also find a URL pointing to a PEM file containing a MARC certificate. That brings us to step three, validate the logo. The SVG file isn't just any SVG. BIMI requires a specific SVG profile known as tinyps, which stands for portable/secure. Before displaying that image, you'll want to perform some sanity checks. You don't want scripts, external references, animations, embedded bitmaps, or any sort of XML funny business. In other words, treat the SVG as untrusted content until you've verified that it's safe. You may also decide to validate any associated MARC certificate. Today, Gmail and Apple require a verified MARC certificate, or VMC, before they'll display a BIMI logo. Google also supports common MARC certificates, or CMCs, which are intended for organizations that can demonstrate long-term use of a logo, even if that logo isn't trademarked. Other mailbox providers take a different approach. Yahoo and Fastmail, for example, do not require MARC certificates, which means you have a policy decision to make. Do you want to require MARC certificates? Do you validate them if they're present? Do you ignore them entirely? I don't know that there's a single right answer. Different providers will have different thoughts on this. And once you've validated the logo, you'll probably want to cache it and generate your own appropriately sized image assets for display. If a sender is delivering thousands of messages to your users, you don't want to have to download and process that same SVG image thousands of times. And finally, step four, decide whether you trust the sender enough to display the logo. Just because a domain passes authentication and publishes a valid BIMI record doesn't mean you have to display the logo. Mailbox providers make trust decisions all the time. If a sender has a poor reputation, generates excessive complaints, lands on block lists, or otherwise looks abusive, you may decide not to show the logo. After all, displaying a BIMI logo is a reward. It's a signal that says we recognize this sender and we're willing to display their chosen brand identity. Authentication is what gets them into consideration. Trust is what helps determine whether or not that logo actually appears. Now, there are plenty of additional details beyond what I've covered here. I haven't talked about the AVP or avatar preference flag. I haven't gone into selectors either, though I think supporting them is a good idea if you're able to do that. And every mailbox provider will ultimately have its own display policies and trust model. But if you're trying to understand BIMI from the receiver's perspective, remember these 4 steps. That's the basic roadmap to BIMI support for a mailbox provider. And as I wrap up this video for today, Here are links to more resources, including the very handy BIMI Group website, home of the Auth Indicators Working Group, where the work to define and expand the BIMI logo specification happens. And with that, thanks so much for watching. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can always email me at al.iverson@valamail.com. And be sure to visit our website at valamail.com when you're ready to embark upon your DMARC journey or when you want to begin your BIMI brand adventure.